Now, you're probably all wondering why I'm filming a video now, considering the last video I was basically going to be finishing up Angular 2 until February. Well, I got a little bit of time, so I thought I'd do one more video, and this is literally the last video I'll be working on. I might, as I said, I might try and do something when I'm overseas, but it's highly unlikely because I'm going to be on holidays and I'm not going to want to really sit in a room and talk into a microphone. So, what I'm going to do for this particular lesson though is I'm moving away from forms now, and what I wanted to look at next was the Lifecycle hooks in Angular 2 for a component. And on top of that, I also, for this video, I wanted to look at output, the output decorator, and what that does for us in terms of creating events. The reason why I'm putting these two together is because it'll make more sense when I start. But basically, it's kind of a two-in-one combo here, but it's basically the start of looking at lifecycle events. Now, there are 8 of them. This one is only going to be involving 1 of them so far. Now, I was going to originally do 4 in one video and then 4 in the next. But because of a little bit of the complexity of this first one that I wanted to address, I decided to combine it in with the output component aspect, the event aspect of components. So I'm going to get started now. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to once again use my GitHub repo for this lesson, and the reason for that is because what I'm about to show you isn't really going to fit into anything that we're building, but you'll probably see that we've already used some of this already anyway, and I'll explain at the end what we've already used and why we've used it, and it might make a little bit more sense to you. Especially in the dynamic forms session in the last video, I had an OnChanges event that I put a lot of the form field code in, but I didn't fully explain what it did. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about that first life cycle event for components, which is OnChanges. Alright, so what I'm going to do first, I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to come up to here. I'm already in my Angular 2 folder. So I'm just going to go ng new, and I'm going to call this Lifecycle hooks part 1. That should be hooks, because I want to have multiple different projects for the different lifecycle hooks. So I'm going to create this. Now this might take a little bit because it's going to go and add everything in. Now, while I was doing that, I'm going to address once again to the people who keep complaining about the fact that they have to wait for me to do this. I do this so that other people can follow along in real time, okay? So if I was to basically cut out the video and have to wait for this, then people would have to, if I cut this out of the video, then it means that other people have to sit there and pause the video and wait. Whereas if I do it this way, at least it gives them a bit of time to do it with me. And if I happen to get too far ahead, they can always pause it just for a little bit. But I try to go slowly in these videos so that you guys can follow along. And that's why I don't cut these bits out. So at the moment, it's installing packages. This takes a little bit to do. So I don't know how many of you guys so far have been following along from tutorial 1. I definitely see a lot of people starting tutorial 1, tutorial 2, and then there's a bit of a drop off. So if you have been here all along, all the way up to, what is this? I think this is tutorial 17 now. I really appreciate the effort by you guys. But I am seeing a drop off, but that's pretty standard. Like, with anything that you learn, a lot of people start off learning and then they kind of go, you know what, I don't care to follow along anymore, or, this guy isn't going at the pace that I like. You can't help that. And when I look at other people's videos, to do with courses, I see the same thing. You know, I see a lot of people in the first few videos is quite a high rate of people, but then the retention falls off as you create more videos. But for the people who follow along and are dedicated to this is why we continue to do it. So anyway, so now we've finally got the packages installed, and so now I'm going to cd into that directory I just created. So what did I call it? I'll just double check again. Lifecycle hooks part 1, and I want to get into the source folder, and I'm just going to quickly run this at ng serve just to ensure that we've got our little backbone program. Because I would hate, to have a disaster at the start. We should get the default app works screen when we load it. So now we've got it loaded. I'll come over here. Now I've got app works. Cool. So I'm just going to stop it again. So again, if you're using Mac, Control-C stops it. So what I'm going to do now is I want to create a new child component, because how this ng OnChanges works, well, actually, I'll explain more in a minute, but basically it works with child components. You need a parent component and a child component in order to use this event handler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new component. Now, I'm just going to put it in the root, so I'm going to ensure that I'm actually in the root, and I'm not. So now I'm in the root of the app folder. So I'm going to go ng g component, and I'm just going to call it child. So once again, just let that create itself. Cool. And that's all I need for now from the console and from the browser. So I'm going to come over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open up that folder that I just had. So Angular 2, structural hooks, and I'm going to open up source, and I don't need to do anything inside of source. I'm going to open up app and go OK. And the first thing I found is that, stupid me again, the fact that it always creates features inside of folders. I mean, this could be fine actually. I might leave it in the folder and just stick with the conventions. Just ensure here that the module's got the information loaded and it's got the component loaded. That's good. So now let's get started. So I'm going to come over to the child component, and what I'm going to do is first I'm going to get rid of this on-init because we're not using it for this lesson. On-init is one of the next lifecycle hooks that we'll look at, but it happens to be the default for when we create it via the Angular CLI, and we also don't need a constructor actually, so we'll get rid of that as well. Now we've got app child, that's fine, and that should be fine there. Whoops, sorry about that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to reference the app child, I believe, in the app component. So let's do that first. So we come down to app component, and just underneath here I'm just going to go app child, like so. App child, and just quickly, very, very quickly now we should see that there should be something underneath here. So, oh hang on, I didn't start ngg. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll look at this later. So I'm gonna leave this here right now. So it's now inside the main app component HTML. And now what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do for this particular subject is I want to include a few imports. So the first one I want to include is an OnChanges interface. And along with that, I'm going to include a simple changes interface. And I'll explain what these are in a minute. So once I do that, I'm going to implement the ng OnChanges down here. Or first, I'll go implements OnChanges, and that's going to complain that I need a ng OnChanges function, so I need to add that like so. And inside of here we're going to take a parameter. Now the parameter is called changes, and it's a type of simple changes. Now, what does this simple changes thing contain? Well, what it is that whenever you make a change to any input into this component, it's going to specify previously what it was set to, and then it's going to show you the new values that it's set to. Now, this will make more sense when I actually log it out, which is what I'm going to do now. So I'm just going to put here console.log, like so, json.stringify, and then the changes, right? That's what I'm going to do. So if I now come over and I come in to run this, so I'm going to leave this now running in gserve. I don't need to create any more components. So now we should get a bit of text underneath the browser, and if I open up, well, I should do that while this is running. If I open up the console, you should see that event getting fired. No, you won't. I know, I'll explain why in a minute. So now let's refresh. And we get child works, right? So we've got our component, we've got our OnChanges. Now we can see so far it's not being called. So when does this thing get called, right? When do we actually do something with this? Well, the OnChanges event applies to any inputs that you have for a component. So for example, what I'm going to do, so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add in a parameter, and I'm going to call it value to change, like so, right? And it's type of any, and that's what I'm going to do at this stage, right? But I want to decorate it as an input, so at input, like so. So now we need to come up here and we need to include input regular core. So at the moment, is this going to change the situation? Well, technically no, because we haven't actually specified any values for this. So ng OnChanges will not be called again at this point. But what we've done is we've provided an input, right? We've provided an input that we now can possibly change in a parent. So the next course of action is to go up to the HTML for the parent, which is the app component HTML. And now we're going to pass in a parameter here. So what did we call it? Well, we called it value to change, like so, and pass it in there. And we're going to reference it as something we're going to have in the component, right? And what we're going to call that, well, we can call it anything. We can call it object to change or something like that, right? It really doesn't matter what we call it as long as it's, you know, some kind of object that we're passing through as an input. Right? So now we need to create this inside of our main app component. So we're under title, I'm just going to put object to change equals, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create it as an object. Now for this demonstration, what I'm also going to include here is a number to change, like so, right? And this is just going to be a default number of, let's say 90, right? And inside of this object, I'm going to have a number to change, which will equal to this dot number to change. And so now we have this object to change that's coming through the parameter value to change. So the child component now has a value here. So will this fire? That's the question, right? So let's come over and let's run the refresh. And as you can see down here, now we have a JSON feed. So now that we've set an input to something, we've got value to change has been fired. The previous value was, well, it was nothing. We didn't have anything for it. But you can see now the current value is equal to that object we passed in, right? So basically what this is basically whenever we change the value of the input, we're going to get a value to change event, or a ng OnChanges event as part of the hook that will fire. Now this is not 100% accurate, okay? And I'm about to go through a number of examples which demonstrates how this really works, because you'd be very surprised how a lot of people get this wrong and they expect this event to fire when it doesn't fire. And so I'm going to go through a few examples, right? And the first example I'm going to do is I'm going to increment the integer, or the number, sorry, that's inside of the app component. So this number, the change value that's been passed through as part of the object, I'm going to increment that value. So I'm going to create a function down here, like so, whoops, and I'm just going to call it increment. Right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go this dot value to change dot, and I think, what was the name of the number to change? Right, plus equals 1, right? So we're incrementing it by 1 each time. Now this is a property on the input that's being passed through. So by rights, you think by changing this, it would fire this OnChanges event. Let's see what happens. So the first thing, or the next thing I need to do, I need to come into the component, and what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to emit out, so get rid of this, I'm going to emit out the actual value. So where is it? No, wrong one. I'm going to grab this, essentially, and emit that out every time we change something, right? So interpolation will kick in and the binary will be updated. Now what I'm going to also add into here is I'm going to add a button. So type equals button, and we're going to call it, what do we call it? Update, no, increment. We'll just call it increment value, like so, right? And I'm going to wire up a click event here. So this is all standard stuff you've already seen. So that click event's going to be fired. What's going to call this, essentially. Now this is step number 1. So what have we done here? We've got a component that has an input of any, right? So it's any object. We know it's passed in from the app component. The app component itself has created an object that's got a property called number to change inside of it, right? At this point, I haven't been concerned with static typing. I'll just put any to make the example easier to work with. But normally you would have some, static or some strict type there. But for this example, I'm just making it easy on myself. So we come out of the component. We know we've got something loaded there. So on first load, we know this fires because this value gets assigned, right? So when we click increment, we are now changing the state of the input that's coming in. Now, what they say in the documentation for Angular is that whenever you make a change to the input, this should fire, right? Any change to any current input should fire the OnChanges. Well, let's see what happens here. So we click it. So we've got everything wired up. I'm going to come over to the browser. We see we've got this new button. Now I'm going to click it, and we see the value goes up. So we click it a couple more times, the value goes up. However, what we're not seeing down here is we're not seeing, that changes event getting called every single time we change the value. Right? I continue to click this, and nothing happens. And people might be thinking, oh, but you're changing the state of the input, right? Well, yes, you are. But how it works, and this is what they don't tell you, is that you have to change the input from outside the component. So if I change the input inside of the component here, so even if I was to go, for example, and I'll just do this to demonstrate, if I now set this to a new object, like so, number to change equals 3 or something like that, right? Sorry, it's an object. If I do this, right, then you think, okay, well, even then this should change because we've changed the whole object reference, right? So we've not just changed the number inside of it, we've changed the reference completely. So does this trigger an OnChanges event? Based on what I just said, it shouldn't. So if I click this now, we see it's gone to 3, but again, no OnChanges events been fired because we've got an extra JSON. So that confirms completely that this cannot be fired upon within your own component unless you do some flashy stuff, which you can do to trigger it. Okay, and this is what I'm going to demonstrate for the rest of the video. So let's put this back to what it was. So we'll keep the it incrementing that button. So the next step we're going to take is we're going to modify the value of number to change from outside of the component, right? Because now we're changing. Because if we do that, we're changing the status of the input, right? And we'll see what happens with OnChanges then. So what I'm going to do is, and this is the first time you're going to see this, I'm going to create an output, what's referred to as an output. And in fact, guys, I'm just getting a call. I'm just going to stop for a moment. Okay, sorry guys, I'm back. So where were we? Oh, that's right. I was looking at output, the outputs for the child component. Now, what an output generally is for a component? Well, it's an event, most of the time. I have yet to see an output that isn't an event. Now, how do we do events in Angular 2? Well, it's actually pretty easy. And it kind of follows similar conventions to Node, if anyone knows Node. There's this concept of an event emitter. So what we need to do now is up here we just need to include the output interface, and we need to also grab an event emitter, like so. Right. So now I can come down to the output. I'm going to call this output reset value at parent. Right. And I'm going to go equals new event emitter. This is generally how you create an event, right? And then what I'm going to do next is I want to actually raise this event in a particular way. So I'm going to create a method called reset to parent value, like so. And inside of here we just go this dot reset to value parent dot emit. Alright, so we emit an event up the scale to whoever's listening to this component, or whoever's got this component attached, and they can choose to either subscribe to it or not. Alright, but we're at least emitting the event. Now, the other thing we need to do is we need to go into the child component and we need to create another button that calls that method. So just quickly dump this here, copy this, and we'll paste, and we'll change the event name to that. Reset, and then I'll just put here reset to parent value, like so. And that's the child component side of things. So just to go through it again, what we're doing is we want to reset the value to change, this thing here, or the number to change on value to change in the parent, because we know that if we try and change it locally here, that it updates the number, but the OnChanges is never fired. And the OnChanges is never fired because this never gets fired when you make changes to the input within the component itself. It has to be changed by the parent component. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're implementing an output that's an event. So when we click that button that's inside this component, it's going to emit an event. And now what we need to do over an app component is we need to subscribe to that event. So if you don't remember how events work in Angular 2, it's the round parentheses. So you've got attribute binding and then you've got event binding. So we're just going to quickly grab the name of the event. I called it again, reset value at parent. And we plug that in here. And then when that happens, we're going to call a function, right? And the function that we call can be anything, to be honest with you. And I'm going to call it reset to default value, like so, right? So now we come into the app component, because now we're in the parent component. we come over to the app component, and we're going to implement that function. Down here, like so. We're now going to go object to change, right? Dot number to change, because we've got the property already, equals this dot number to change. So it's essentially resetting it, the value to what it was, right? And this should also say this dot object to change. Right, so let's see what this does. So the question is now going to be to you guys, will this OnChanges fire because we're changing the value of the number to change from within the parent? So we're no longer in the child scope, we're now in the parent scope. So by rights, based on what Angular is saying, because we're bound an input to, from the parent down to the child, if we change anything on the parent, that should affect the input, right? Should then fire the child event handler. Let's see what it does though. So, and I'm just going to come back here because this is really starting to annoy me. I'm just going to add a paragraph tag around this, just simply because these buttons I want on a new line, and it's not. So let that reload. Alright, so now we've got it the way I like it. So down here we can see it's fired once, and that always happens when you create the component for the first time you set the input. You get that once. So we've got the default of 90. We'll increment this a couple of times, right? But now we're going to reset to the parent value, right? So currently we're on 99. We'll click reset to parent value, and I got an error. Reset to default value is not a function. What did I call it inside the app component? Oh, I've given it the wrong name. Sorry guys. So over an app component, I probably grabbed this instead of this. That's just a simple mistake. Sorry about that. I hope you guys may have picked that up while you're watching. So once again, we'll click on this a few times. Get it to 100. If I click reset to parent, we know it should go back down to 90 because that was the default, and it does. And strangely enough, once again, that OnChanges is not called. So we've changed the value of the input through the parent, right? And that's what the documentation Angular says, right? If we change the parent or the value that's passed through as the input within the parent, then generally the OnChanges should fire. Well, the bit that they're missing is they do mention the word binding, and in Angular, if you're an Angular developer, you probably would understand this, so you're probably sitting there going, well, duh, Darrow, it's because of this, this, and this. But if you're not an Angular developer, like you didn't do Angular 1, a binding is generally by reference, right? So what are we doing here, though? We're not changing the reference of this object, we're just changing the property on it. So because we're only changing the property on it, and we're not actually changing the reference itself, it doesn't detect the change. It's like, oh, you haven't changed anything. Technically you have, but it doesn't know or doesn't fire when you make a change like this. It only fires if I was to do something like this. Right? What I'll do is I'll create a button for it so you can see it yourself. But yeah, it will never work if you go and change a property on the input that's being passed in. You have to change the input itself from within the parent for it to be applied. And that is literally meaning changing the reference of the object so that it points to a new object. Okay? So let's quickly go about doing that. So I'm going to go back to the child component, and what we're going to do is going to create another event. So we go output, right? And I'm going to call this one reset reference on parent. Reset reference on parent. So again, a new event emitter, right? And then we'll create a function for this, and this will be called reset parent reference. And we'll go this dot reset. You guys should get the idea of what I'm doing now. I shouldn't have to explain this part again. And then basically I'm going to go and create another button. Right? come in here, pretty much grab another button, paste, grab the name of the method, come in and paste there, and we'll just reset. Actually, what do I want to call this? We'll just call reset parent reference. We'll just call it that. Parent reference, like so. So that's the child component bit done. So now we'll just grab the on reference on parent. We'll go over to app component. We're going to create another event for this, like so. So this is the same as before, and we'll call it reset to new reference. Reset to new reference. I always put the semicolon, but it's really not necessary. And we'll do copy that, come to the component, we'll create another function. Right? And what this function is going to do is literally this. Exactly what this is doing here. So we're going to recreate a new instance of it. This object change is completely new object with the original value set, right? So if I now go in and save this, I believe I've covered everything. So the app loads, we see that there's a ng value changes call on the start of it, which we know because we're setting it for the first time. We click increment value a few times, nothing happens. Down here, we click reset to value, again, nothing happens. So I'll click this up, we'll get it up to 100. And if I click reset parent reference, watch what happens. So it resets to 90, but also down here, because we changed the reference to the input, it's triggered a ng OnChanges, which has now shown us what the previous value was, which we had set to 100. And now it tells us what the current value is, which we reset back to 90 through a reference. So that's how it works, okay? ng OnChanges works in that fashion. You must change the reference of the input within the outer component in order to detect or have that event fire within your child component, okay? It's a distinction that I've seen a lot of developers get wrong when they first work on it. They're like, I don't get it, why is it not changing? Well, it's not changing because you need to change the reference of the passed in input from your parent component. Now, just as an added bonus, and because I've already mentioned outputs and events, I thought I might as well finish off this video with a little bonus event thing that you can know about. I was going to have a complete topic on events, but to be honest with you, there's not much else to add other than what I've already shown, except for the one other thing I want to show you now. So this one is outside the scope of the Lifecycle hooks. It's got nothing to do with ng OnChanges. It's just something I want to show. So let's come back over to the code. So we'll come back to the child component, and I'm going to add one more output. Okay, so I know there's a lot of outputs, and normally I wouldn't design a system this way. I would not have so many events firing in the one component. You can change your code up based on whatever you need it to do, right? But this is just so I can demonstrate a particular issue or a particular solution to something without going full on into a full design. So what I'm going to do now is the last thing. I'm going to create another one called parent value changed. So parent value changed, like so, equals new event emitter. This is all the same, and you've seen all this already. We'll create a save value, right? Save value to parent, like so. And what we're going to do is we're going to go this dot parent value changed, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass in, right, the actual value of this dot value to change dot, is it number to change? Just quickly confirm that in the app component. Number to change, yep. So I'm going to, oh sorry, it should say emit, sorry. So now we're emitting an event, but as part of the event, we're also passing a new parameter. So this is how you can pass parameters through your events to your parent components and so on and so forth. You can pass it in this fashion, right? So if I come up to, in fact, I'm going to create the button first that calls this. So I have to create yet another button. Right, and I'm going to point it to set value to parent. And I'll call it the name of the button, save value to parent. So save value to parent. Should I read that? Right. So now this, when I click on this, it'll trigger this event passing in the number that's part of the input. So technically, it is already the number that's already been set by the parent. So the parent can technically access this when it wants. But because we want it to save the new value at a particular time, you'll understand when I get to the point of it. So now we'll come to the app component. And before I go too far, I want to grab this. And come to the app component. We're going to add one more event binding. And I'm going to call this one, what will I call this one? Keep child value, right? And how you access that input that we just had, it comes from $event. It's like the input name. Now, I probably will do another video on events just because that's not actually everything. But for this particular example, we're passing in one input. So $event is essentially the number that's passed through, the saved number. So let's go and create this function inside of our app component. Right, so like so. And we're passing in the child value, which is a type of number. Right. And what we're going to do is we're going to go this dot object to change dot number to change equals child value. And you want to say, okay, so what you basically changing the number at this scope, is it going to flow through? And the answer is it should, because now you're changing the value at the highest level, right? And in fact, this is not the right way to do it. What I should be doing, is this dot number to change, like so, is that. Right. I'm just trying to think how this worked again. I think I do that, and then I go this dot. No, I think I call reset to new reference. This dot reset to new reference, because I've set the number to change, but I want, in order to reflect the change down the chain, it needs to create a new reference. I think this is what I had to do. I'm trying to remember now off the top of my head. So we come to the code, increment this a couple of times. I'm going to save this. So now 100 will be the value when I should reset the parent value. So I click save here. Once again, we get the change down here, so we can see what the previous value was and what the new value was, which happens to be the same, strangely enough. I'm just trying to work out why that's the case. Because we changed the number. Yeah, that's weird. Just going to go back to the code for a second. Maybe I don't need this line. Let me see what happens if I remove this line. So we got the 1ng event. We're going to increment that a little bit. Click save value to parent. So now if I keep incrementing and I click reset parent value, we go back to 100. Yeah, so we didn't need to save the parent reference because that changes the we changed the value of the sum value or the sum number first before we changed the reference. So therefore, the old version of the number was 100 already. So when we changed the reference, it was still 100. So therefore, the old and new values were both 100. That's what happened there. So basically, now we have the ability to change what the default value is from the parent by clicking this button. So if I continue to reference up here, I click this. If I click reset parent reference, it stays on the 111 as well, and it fires off that event because we're changing the reference. If I come in here now and set it to 120 and then click reset reference, you'll see that the old value was 111 and the new value is 120. So, the old value was 120 and it's reset back to 111. If I come into 20 and I set save value to parent, so now when I click on reference, reset to reference, it should always come back to 120. So if I had like so, and click on this, it sets it back to 120, fires the event. I do the same thing here. It's not going to fire the event because we're just changing the value, but it updates the value here. So I hope that kind of makes sense with what ng OnChanges does for your child component. It's not as simple as Angular makes it look. You just have to remember that binding is reference based, and as long as you remember that, and if you pass in an object and you only change the property on an object, that ng OnChanges is not going to fire. So you have to always change the reference of the input in order for that to fire. Now, quickly, while I'm still here, I want to show my dynamic form code again and explain now how or why I put it inside of ng OnChanges, because now it will make sense to you, hopefully. So I'm going to stop this and I'm going to come over to a different directory. So I'm going to go up a directory again. I'm going to go up a few directories by a little bit. And I'm going to go into CD Angular 2 tutorial. I'm just going to quickly check what branch I'm in. I'm in master, so it should technically have everything I need. So ng serve. And while that's happening, I'm going to close this. I'm going to open up the Angular 2 tutorial app. Open. Right. And we'll come down to, what was it, teams, edit team, and team edit component.ts. And that's where we had this ng OnChanges, right? So let's just quickly look at the UI for this. Oh, hang on a sec, what's happened here? Team edit component incorrectly implements interface on init. Does it? It shouldn't. Interesting. I'll have to add that back to the commit. Not sure how this ever worked if that was there anyway. So we've got it running now. And if I come into teams, if you remember, we come here and we come down to teams and we can edit this, but it doesn't actually change up here anymore. And I'll submit and the value changes. Alright. If I click on it again, I still have to fix that bug. It knows to dynamically create this information. Now let's have a think about what we're doing though, right? So we're coming in here, we need to create a dynamic form based on a number of form fields. So that's this here, right? So you're like, okay, we've got some dynamic fields, right? So that's all good. We could probably, like on initialization, we could work that out and just keep that stored as a variable, and that's all fine, right? However, if we do that, right, it means that we can never update the controls anymore for the form, right? And we kind of need to update the controls of the form with the right values and stuff every time we click a new person, right? Every time we click one of these, this has to regenerate itself every time, right? So if you use init, right, it will only ever be created once when you click on something. Alright? But because this component is always loaded, right, and the reason why it's always loaded is because you have it open, you just want to click on it and have it change like that, right? You don't want to have to click on it and then it closes and then reopens. That looks a bit weird. So you leave it open and then you click on each of these and it changes the state of the controls. But technically these controls are being recreated every time, right? And set with the right values. And you might say, oh, why aren't we doing this in init? Well, the thing with init, and this is what I want to get to in the next video, was that it's only ever fired once, and that is on creation. Now, if you remember the ng if example I had, I think it was about 2 tutorials back, when you toggle the component off, and it's inside of ng if, it destroys itself. And then it reinitializes, then it destroys itself, then it reinitializes, right? And that's how you can toggle, init multiple times. But for this example, that doesn't really apply because when I click on this, we don't want to destroy the form and then recreate it. We just want to rebind it, right? So because we want to rebind it, and we want to do it every time there's a change, right? Because this is technically a change. What we're doing behind the scenes is we're clicking on something and it's changing the team that's currently selected. And that happens to be an input, right? So if we come back over, we see selected team as an input, right? So whenever I click on the new row, this changes, this selected team changes, right? The reference changes. So because of that, that's why we have to do an ng OnChanges. Because if we try and do it on init, then whenever I click on these new ones, it will never actually do anything. It will actually do it once, and then it'll never do it again as long as the component is alive. Right? But however, if I change it while it's still alive, I can run this ng OnChanges multiple times and just ensure that a team has actually been selected. Now, that's kind of why I've done it this way. I'm sure you might be able to do it through OnInit if you're clever, but I found it easier just to load the controls dynamically every time. Now, from a production point of view, people might be asking, well, you're getting the fields every time from a service. Now, that could be a database or an API or something, right? Or it will be an API probably of some sort. You're getting from an API, geez, that's going to be slow because every time you click on something, you have to go and get the fields for that, and that's another request across the wire. Well, that's true. And, there are plenty of ways around it. You can cache it. This service can have the ability to cache the form fields temporarily. And then once that cache expires, then only then does it make a network call. There's a number of things you can do inside of that service that you create here. And the service lives as long as the component lives. So this will only ever be one instance. So as soon as you initialize this component, there's only one instance of this. So you could store caching inside of the service itself, and when you call this, the cache is not going to be wiped out because the instance is different. So you could look to do something like that. There's a number of different ways to do it, but the reason why I had ng OnChanges was simply so I could create a form every time based on a new selection of the team. And that was the basic reason for it. I couldn't really explain at the time why I was doing that, because I wanted to explain more on how this actually works, this ng OnChanges, and that it's based on references and bindings rather than just changing the input of a reference, which some people get confused by. And that's it. That's all I wanted to show in this video. I know it's another long one, but I think it's worth it. And it's Christmas Eve here, so people are probably wondering what the hell I'm doing putting up a video. Well, Christmas Eve I happen to be alone. A lot of people have gone out to different events, and I'm at home at the moment. I'm expecting somebody shortly to show up and say hello. That's why I want to get this done now. And then obviously tomorrow I'm going to be extremely busy with Christmas. Lots of family stuff, just like the rest of you. So yeah, I'm going to end this up here, and this will probably be my final video for the year, and at least until February. Once again, I said this last time, but I'm pretty sure this time this is going to be the last one. So thank you everybody for listening, and I hope to see you all in the next video I create. Bye for now.